Shalom, my dear friends. Today, the 21st day of the month of Marcheshvan of this year of redemption, the year 5784, corresponding to November the 5th of the year 2023. I'm speaking to you from the holy city of Yerushalayim, and the people of Israel are still in a state of war. And the war is affecting us in the south of the country and the north of the country. And I do not intend to get into the details of this war today. But as everybody knows, people both in Israel and across the world are in incredible pain right now over the darkness, the violence, the destruction that is occurring. And Rabbi Nachman of Breslov teaches us that there's a natural tendency, a natural instinct in us, built in times of pain. We tend to screw our eyes up. And Rabbi Nachman explains why this reflex is inbuilt into us, a very profound secret. When a person wants to look at something very far away, they have to focus their vision, and this often involves somewhat screwing up their eyes in order to focus the vision on the far-off object and also to avoid the interference of things that are intervening in between. And likewise, when a person is suffering great pain, the only way to overcome this pain, to transcend the pain, is to look at the very far distant ultimate purpose for which God is sending this situation. And when we are able to focus our eyes on this far distant ultimate purpose, which is most certainly good, because everything that God does is for good, and everything is leading to the good goal, the good end, when we do this, then we will find comfort from our pain. And that is the reason why today I've chosen to speak about our coming temple, our holy future temple in Yerushalayim, which is essentially what the entire present war is all about. Because the present war is a war between the faith in the God of Israel, the faith in the inalienable right of the people of Israel to live in peace in the land of Israel, and on the other side, enemies whose status in the world will be completely undermined when Israel will be restored to the national glory with the restoration of the temple, the influx of all of the exiles with the coming of Melech Mashiach. Moses Maimonides, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, the Rambam, writes in the concluding chapters of his monumental code of Torah law, the Mishnah Torah, that when Melech Mashiach will come, all of the laws of the Torah will be restored, and he enumerates not only the laws relating to how we relate to one another, how we live with one another, but also the laws of the sabbaticals in the land, the laws relating to agriculture, and the laws of the temple and the temple sacrifices. The subject of the temple sacrifices was made to be controversial from the 18th century onwards in Jewish circles by those rebels who did not want to accept the authority of the rabbis and the authority of the Babylonian Talmud. It is quite clear from the rabbinical tradition that the sacrificial service of the temple, while being profoundly incomprehensible, while involving concepts that are extremely difficult for us to digest and to accept, nevertheless, it is the will of God that these sacrifices should be performed in the holy temple in Jerusalem daily, with the sacrifice of the lamb morning and afternoon, on the Sabbaths, on the new moons, and on the festivals, together with all of the laws and arrangements of the sacrifices as set forth in the Torah and as elaborated in great detail in the Talmud and the rabbinical codes. This became a matter of controversy because the rebels against Orthodox Torah observance did not want to have any return to the temple and its practices on the basis of the ethical foundations of secularists, rationalists from the 1800s onwards. Indeed, the concept of the temple sacrifices had been seriously undermined outside of Jewish circles by the advent of the established Christian church, which essentially tried to hijack and alter the concept of the sacrifice to place the entire sacrifice on the person of the so-called, the alleged founder of this established religion, and thereby to completely extirpate the temple services. Indeed, this was in the interest of the establishment in the city of Rome, where any return to the centrality of Jerusalem would have undermined the status of the city of Rome, and likewise with the rise of Islam, any focus on Jerusalem as a center of the religion would have distracted from the centrality of Mecca. And even though in recent decades there has been an attempt to establish the Temple Mount as somehow an important site for the Ishmaelites, nevertheless, everybody knows that the tradition of the Torah has links to the Temple Mount for many, many thousands of years. Indeed, yesterday in our synagogues or in our homes, we read the portion of Vayero, which begins with the announcement of the birth of Isaac and concludes with the monumental passage where God orders Abraham to elevate Isaac, v'ha'alehu, to lift him up on the place that I will tell you to go to, and this place is none other than the Temple Mount. And God did not want Abraham to slaughter his son on the mount as a sacrifice. He wanted to elevate Isaac, that Isaac should understand that we are to be bound hand and foot in the service of God. And this is what is called the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, where Isaac willfully submits himself to be bound hand and foot by the laws of the Torah. And this was the archetypal sacrificial situation where God does not want the sacrifice of the human. The sacrifice of the human is repugnant to God. And here in the portion of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, we have the archetypal concept of the transfer from the human onto the animal who becomes the focus of the korban. And this is a very great mystery, how and why it could be that an animal could be taken by a human being and could be used for the spiritual purposes of the human being. This precisely is what many, many critics of the Bible and of Torah law have come up with on the basis of their ethical presuppositions. And while some have arisen to protest any thought of the restoration of the temple sacrifices, nobody pays attention for a single moment to the literally millions and millions of animals of all kinds, other living creatures, be it fish or fowl, birds, who are slaughtered daily for the pleasure and for the greed of human beings. Human beings, by and large, across the world, with the exception of more sensitive people, feel very little inhibition about taking animals to use them for whatever purpose it's been done from time immemorial, where animals were set to plow, donkeys were set to carry passengers and baggage. But in the temple, according to the Torah, it is God's will that we take certain animals at certain prescribed times, and these are actually slaughtered. Their blood is sprinkled on the altar, and their skin is removed from the animal. Their limbs are cut into, the animal is cut up into its portions, and these are burned upon the altar to the accompaniment of priestly rituals, the singing of the Levites, and the prayers of the Israelites. Now, what is all this about, and why now, at this juncture in human history, should anybody be talking about the restoration of the temple services? And for that, we must go to the other great Rabbi Moshe, who arose centuries after Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, the Rambam, and who is considered to be on the same scale of greatness as Rambam in his explanation of the depths of the secrets of the Torah, that we refer to as the Kabbalah, the mystical dimension of the Torah. And Rabbi Moshe Chayim Luzzatto, born at the end of the 1600s, around 1697-98, who passed away at the tragically early age of around 38 to 40 in the 1740s. Rabbi Moshe Chayim Luzzatto, born in Padua in Italy, a child genius in his very many voluminous works on the Kabbalah, included a short kuntres, a kind of extended essay, in which, uniquely in rabbinical literature, Rabbi Moshe Chayim Luzzatto sets out the meaning of the vision of the prophet Ezekiel, from chapters 40 to the end of the book of Ezekiel, about the future temple. As Rambam Maimonides states in the beginning of the Hilchos Beis HaBechira, the laws of the temple, in the Mishnah Torah, the vision of Ezekiel is the vision of the temple that has yet to be, and is the prophesied temple found in the prophecies of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and all of the other prophets. And unique among the rabbinical commentators, Rabbi Moshe Chayim Luzzatto, in his kuntras known as the Mishkanei Elyon, the supreme sanctuaries, discusses the entire vision of Ezekiel, in which the prophet was shown the walls, the courtyards, the entrances, and all of the other details of the temple, the chambers. The Rabbi Moshe Chayim Luzzatto, as we've already discussed in a previous class, explains the Kabbalistic meaning of the form of the temple, and more, for our present purposes, discusses the meaning of the sacrificial services. And only in the light of these profound concepts will we grasp how absolutely important is the temple in Jerusalem for the entire world. And no wonder that it is such an issue of contention between those remaining believers in the Torah among the people of Israel and our allies, as against the enemies of the people of Israel and the enemies of the Torah. No wonder it's such a point of contention, because those who seek to hide and to obscure the light are those who are opposed to the temple sacrifices, which indeed are to bring blessing not only to Israel, not only the people of Israel, but to the people of all the world. And with that, let us go into some of the teachings of Rabbi Moshe Chayim Luzzatto about the temple sacrifices. And before we do that, let us first get a sense of the temple, what we are talking about. The future temple will actually be on an expanded area of land from that of the first and second temples. whereas the first and second temples were on a temple mount of the dimensions of 500 cubits by 500 cubits, which is about 250 meters by 250 meters, the future temple is said to have an area of 3,000 cubits by 3,000 cubits. That is the Temple Mount as a whole. The Temple Mount, in other words, consisting not only of the central temple structure, but also of the courtyards within which the temple structure stands. Now, 3,000 cubits by 3,000 cubits is around something like 1.5 kilometers. It's getting on to close to a mile by a mile square. And the form of the courtyards of the future temple is a series of concentric squares where the Temple Mount as a whole is this 3,000 cubit by 3,000 cubit square, in the center of which is what is called the Ezrat Nashim, the outer courtyard. In the center of that is the inner courtyard known as the Azara, and in the center of that is standing the cube of the future temple building. What we see now in front of us on our screens is a picture of the temple altar, which we are seeing from its side, with some cows being taken by the priests for the sacrifice in question. We apparently are seeing the altar from, it's hard to say from illustration, which is purely to help us imagine. We don't see here exactly the altar in relation to the temple building, but there were in the temple two altars. The one we see illustrated is known as the outer altar. This is the altar on which the animal sacrifices were performed, and sacrifices of grain, of flour, and at times oats, of olive oil, and of wine libations. Inside the actual temple building, known as the Devir, was the incense altar, which is a different category of altar, the small golden incense altar, as opposed to the very large white painted altar outside, which is an altar constructed of stones mixed up with limestone in this very specific shape, with its two levels, a red line going around in the middle, the lower area and the upper area, distinct areas for the sprinkling of the blood of different sacrifices, and on the top the altar woodpile, together with what are not seen here, a couple of other smaller wood piles. On the large woodpile will be burned the animal fats and those portions of the animals that had to be burned entirely. So now, with that little introduction, let us turn to the words of Rabbi Moshe Chayim Luzzatto in his section of the secrets of the future temple, my translation of Mishkanei Elyon, the supreme sanctuaries, where the earthly sanctuary is seen to be directly aligned to the heavenly sanctuary, an entirely metaphysical sanctuary on an entirely different plane from the plane on which we live. So now, in his work, Rabbi Moshe Chayim Luzzatto had taken us on a virtual tour of the temple buildings and courtyards, explaining their significance, Kabbalistically the meaning of the dimensions, the mathematics of the construction, but now he turns to the actual sacrifices in the temple. It's in this inner courtyard that the outside altar, or the altar of the burnt offering, is located. And this is where the daily sacrifices are offered. And I must now explain the order of the temple sacrifice services and offerings to the king. I make every effort to understand. Know that all the heavenly hosts, the angels, these are the spiritual agents through which the divine will executes his actions, all the heavenly hosts, the angels and the souls that you and me and all of the people and all of the animals and vegetables and all their levels, the angels being the source of the divinity revealed in the world and the souls being the recipients, all are receiving from the array of the holy lights, the sphirot, the flow of sustenance and power they need in order to survive and carry out their duties. Every day, all created beings must receive blessing and sustenance from their Creator. Why do I say every day? Because each day is a unique level, and no day is like any other. This is not the place to go into this in depth, but every single day is a new creation. And every day the lower realms need to draw close. The Hebrew word for close being karov, close to the upper realms, in order that the branches of creation, all of the beings, should be connected to the roots. So this way the angels are bound to their roots in the sphirot and the souls to their roots. It is the animal offering, the korban, from that same Hebrew root as karov, the korban, the drawing close. The animal offering brings the angels close, while the incense offering brings the souls close. Understand this well, for this is the secret of the verse in Psalms 36, verse 7, man and animal does God save. The innermost beings, the pnimiyim, are called Adam, man, while the exterior creations, the chitzonim, are called behemah, animal. So now the sacrifices consist of animals, oxen, sheep, and goats, and also birds, doves, and pigeons, but not wild animals. Each of these three categories, the domesticated animals, the birds, and the wild animals, all have their unique place in the order of creation. The domesticated animals in the world of Bria, creation, which is, as it were, the blueprint of what is to unfold. The birds in that of Yetzirah, where the blueprint is elaborated, and the wild animals are said to be in our world of Asiyah, the material world of action. The wild animals, the chayot, are on such a lowly level spiritually, they are not brought as offerings. Because of the hold of impurity on their level, they will not have the strength to ascend to such an exalted place. Now, the actual altar is the special place prepared for the performance of this service. The intrinsic quality of the altar derives from the point that has been discussed earlier, this convergent point of divine power, which has been discussed as the place of desire. And here burns the blazing fire, of which it is said in Leviticus, this is the burnt offering on the pyre, on the wood pile. Make every effort to understand, for these are very, very deep matters. Before we continue, I'd like to just point to the profound depth of all of this by drawing the parallel between the Holy Temple and our human body, where likewise we have our own sacrifices, our own korbanot, because we could not survive without the food that we ingest. And the various items of food that we ingest are equivalent to the items that are burned on the altar. And indeed, when we chew and swallow our food, it becomes digested, and eventually the nutrients come into the liver and are sent around the body to power all of our actions. And this is how the sacrifices are burned in our body on the woodpile of our burning hearts, with our desires and our intentions to use these energies in the service of God. So the whole sacrificial system is actually a metaphor for the way that we ourselves are taking the powers given to us in the creation and using them to sublimate these powers. We take our vegetable foods and our animal foods, and we actually sublimate them to the level of the spiritual through the spiritual actions we perform with the energy from these sacrifices, the prayers and the study of the Torah and the perform of the mitzvahs that we take from we're able to perform through our food. So continuing now with Ramchal's teaching, there are three categories of people in the temple service: the priests, the Levites, and the Israelites. Understand that there are three main columns: the column of kindness, chesed, the so-called right-hand column, the column of judgment, din, and the center column of mercy. Corresponding to these three categories of the priests, Kohanim, the Levites, Leviim, and the Israelites, the Israelim. Closest of all to the higher levels is Chesed, corresponding to the priest. This is a very profound point, that the person who actually performs the service, who sprinkles the blood on the altar and who burns the parts of the animal on the altar, is the epitome of kindness. And although it may seem that there is an intrinsic cruelty in the taking of an animal and slaughtering it and sprinkling its blood, the ultimate purpose of God is one of kindness. Now these three, the priests, the Levites, and the Israelites, have to be joined in a single bond: beauty, tiferet, the mercy, the center column, the synthesis. They must be joined with and included in strength, gevura, judgment, the left column. So this way, strength, gevura, must be joined with and included in kindness, chesed, while kindness, chesed, the kohen, the priest, finally offers the gift in a fitting manner. So this is why the Israelites, the Levites, and the priests each have their own special places in the inner courtyard of the temple, starting from below and going upwards. When you come into first come into the central courtyard, the Azara, you come to a narrow strip, which is where Israelites are allowed to enter. Followed by that is the Duchan, the raised platform of the Levites from which they sang, and the section between the courtyard of the Israelites and the altar called the Ezrat Kohanim, which is where the priests perform many of their actions. They all have their special places, and all three are present at the time of the offering, although the actual sacrifice, namely the receiving of the blood and taking it to the altar and sprinkling and burning the pieces on the altar, can only be done by the priest. The priest offers the sacrifice. The Levite sings with all his strength. A choir of a minimum of 12 Levites with many musical instruments, while a group of Israelites stand in the temple courtyard praying and focusing intently so that all are elevated together. Now, to be more precise, the courtyard has places for four categories of people: the priests, the Levites, the male Israelites, and the Nashim, the women. The women's places outside in what is called the outer courtyard, known also as the Ezrat Nashim, the women's courtyard, while the other three categories have their places inside, as we've said. Now, three parts of the animal are included in the sacrifice, because living beings are made up of three components. The limbs and the fat are rooted in kindness, chesed. The limbs and the fat, these are the more static part of the body, the bones and the muscles and the fat, all side of chesed. The blood circulating around the body gives the body its power to move. This is the gevurah. And the soul residing in this sanctuary of the body is the beauty, tiferet. So this is why the blood must be sprinkled on the altar while the limbs and the fats are burned on it. And as the soul leaves the animal, it joins them both and thereby ascends and becomes bound to the lofty place to which it rises. In the Holy Sefer Sha'arei Orah, which is in 10 chapters corresponding to the 10 Sfirot, ascending from Malkut upwards one by one and explaining all of the allusions in the holy writings to the 10 Sfirot. In the chapter on the Sfirah of Gevurah, the author, Rabbi Yosef Gikatilia, explains the covenant that God made with the souls of the animals prior to creation, where they were accorded a lower place in the material world with the condition that they would be offered on the altar, and that through their being offered on the altar, they would be able to arise to a higher place than they had previously. There's a very profound secret shedding light on the mystery of how it could be that we're entitled to take animals and slaughter them on the altar. So now continues Ramchal, all of these phenomena of the sacrificial, the places of the sacrifice, all of that visible and manifest in our world here below in accordance with the King's command, namely how it is that our human bodies have these parts. The inner secret is known in the upper worlds as these three aspects, the limbs and the fat, the blood and the soul joined together in a single bond so as to rise and become included in the place to which they ascend. One part of the sacrifice corresponds to the priest, another to the Levite, another to Israelite. Note how all the different aspects of the temple are bound up with creation in general, not only with specific details. It's only later in the chain of creation that begins with the temple from where the creation emanated. There is a descent from the general plane and division into specifics. So now let's look at the sacrificial ritual. First comes the actual slaughter of the animal. Every day in the morning and afternoon, one lamb. On the Shabbat, an additional 2 lambs. On the new moon, an additional 2 oxen and a ram and 7 lambs. Likewise, similarly on the festivals, combinations of numbers of oxen, rams, and lambs and goats. First comes the slaughter of the offering, which can be performed even by one who is not a priest. The purpose of slaughter, shchita, is to bring out the blood, which being rooted on the left side is all the stronger. That's where the destructive angels have their hold. That's why in human beings the blood, if not tempered with the insights of the soul, subduing the blood is the source of our lusts and instincts and impulses. For this reason, the blood has to be brought out by means of the knife, the sakin. Now, the physical knife is the physical embodiment of a spiritual concept which is called a holy light, emanating from the sphira, the divine attribute of bina, understanding. The numerical value of the letters of the word sakin, samach kuf yud nun, is 140, corresponding to the sum of the letters that make up spiritually this light. Now, I'm not going to get into the secrets here that some of these letters are the milui of the particular milui of Ekyer, and through the power of this light, the strong blood, the source of wrongful lusts and impulses, this blood that is not fitted to come before the king, this bad blood, as it were, is removed through this action, and afterwards the portion of the blood that is fit for the altar is received by the priest at the location where the animal has been sacrificed, and the priest has been holding a vessel to the neck of the animal, receiving all the blood, and this is now taken by the priest to the altar to be sprinkled. Before we go on with the temple sacrifice, Ramchal diverges to discuss what is called the house of the knives. The House of the Knives is an area on both sides of the Ulam, the entrance vestibule to the central temple building. The central temple building, whose form generally is known to us from the Torah, from the portions in Exodus where there is the main sanctuary and then the Holy of Holies. In the temple in Jerusalem, in front of this stone structure, stands the vestibule, the Ulam, with its immense entrance of 40 cubits high and 20 cubits wide, and on either side flanking this entrance are these two areas known as the House of the Knives. And says Ramchal, let me now explain to you the secret why they're called the House of the Knives. This is where knives that have been used in the temple services and had become unusable, for example, if there was a niche in the knife which could cause the shechita not to be smooth and the skin of the animal could get caught, rendering the animal treif, unfit for offering on the altar. So the knives were not resharpened. The temple is the place of wealth, and you don't repair things in the temple. You put them away in what is called genizah. So all the knives that were no longer usable were placed in this House of the Knives, and says Ramchal, great wisdom may be seen here. Understand that each of the places we discuss as we proceed, whether in the temple courtyards or elsewhere, has its particular function. Spiritually, special divine lights shine in each place, providing it with the power to carry out the specific activity associated with it. The knives are kept here because this is the place from which these knives receive their power to fulfill their function properly. We're not just trying to end the life of a poor animal. We are doing a holy action, and we are taking an instrument to do this that is sanctified by the Torah tradition. To explain this matter further, the gate of the sanctuary, namely the entrance to the Hechal, is for the souls. The angels do not receive anything from there. They receive nothing at all from the great gate itself. What they do receive from here comes only from the side entrances and the adjacent houses of the knives. From here they receive a little, including the power to prepare their offering and banish all impurity, purifying and rectifying the sacrifice through the power of this knife. Well, now, we're going to just skip these very detailed sections. Anybody who wants to go into this may read this section online in the book, Secrets of the Future Temple. Let us now just go further to hear about the benefits of the sacrifices for the angels and the souls. Understand that even though the animal sacrifices come to rectify the angels, these are God's agents executing the divine plan on all the different levels. Every item in creation, every plant, every animal, every human, we all have these agents who are funneling to us these powers that we are given, and these are the agents through which the divine power comes into the creation. So even though the animal sacrifices come to rectify the angels, it's the people of Israel who are commanded to offer them, since it is Israel who are entrusted with the task of rectifying all the worlds on all their different levels. This is because all the worlds were created for the sake of Israel, whose service gives them merit before the king. It's here in the lower world that the people of Israel offer the animal sacrifice, through which the spiritual angels are rectified. And then after this, the people of Israel, in the person of the priest, goes into the sanctuary itself, the Hechal, and there offers the incense sacrifice on the inner altar, which brings about the rectification of Israel. So thus the sacrificial service starts with the sprinkling of the blood of the daily animal offering on the outside altar in the main temple courtyard, the Azara. in order to go from the lower levels upwards. The animal sacrifices rectifies the external aspects of creation. And at the same time, the souls themselves are also rectified by virtue of the fact that they are carrying out the king's command. Now, immediately after the animal sacrifice, they burn the incense on the golden altar inside the sanctuary. And this brings about the rectification of the inner levels, of the upper world, of the inner aspects of creation. And now after the offering of the incense inside the sanctuary, there is a continuation of the temple service in the morning and the afternoon, where actually it's only after the incense has been burned inside the sanctuary that the priests, having previously sprinkled the blood, now go to burn the animal portions on the altar. The reason being, as Ramchal explains here, the only way to ascend to the supreme level is by starting on the lowest level. Yet the lower worlds can only come to perfection through the rectification of the upper worlds. It's a dialectic. You have to work on both levels. Well, now we come to the secret as to why the most holy offerings are sacrificed in the north. The most holy offerings, these are the Kodesh Kodoshim. These are all of the public offerings, the daily offering, the offerings of Shabbat, additional offering, New Moon, Rosh Chodesh, the festivals. All these are Kodesh Kodoshim. Likewise, the Olah offering of an individual, a burnt offering, the offering that is all burned on the altar is Kodesh Kodoshim, Holy of Holies. Likewise, the sin offering, Chatat, of an individual or the community is Holy of Holies, and likewise the Asham, guilt offering, as opposed to Kodoshim Kalim, the lighter holy offerings, which would include the individual's peace offering, an individual's thanksgiving offering, the offering of the firstborn or the animal tithe, which have a less severe law about them. For one thing, in these cases, the meat is eaten by the person that brings the sacrifice. It's only the blood and the fats offered on the altar, as opposed to the Holy of Holies. Well, in the Holy of Holies, in the case of the sin offering and the guilt offering, the priests do eat the meat of the animal, but it may only be eaten in the central temple courtyard. And in the case of the Olah offering, all of the animal parts must be burned only on the altar. So now there are very specific places in the temple, all of which correspond to different divine attributes. And now Ramchal will explain to us why the slaughter of the Holy of Holies takes place in the northern section of the central temple courtyard. The slaughter of the most holy offerings, the Olah, burnt offering, the Chatat, sin, and Asham, guilt offerings, Kodesh Kodoshim, is carried out in the northern section of the central courtyard because of the beneficial effects of the sacrificial services, which are all brought out through the attribute of strength, Gevorah, which corresponds to the north. If you're standing with your face to the east in the temple, your face to the rising sun with the temple building behind you, your left hand is pointing to the north and your right hand to the south. So the north of the temple courtyard corresponds to Gevorah, and the aspect of Gevorah is one of returning creation to its source. The strength involved is the strength of raising up and elevating that which has been brought downwards. So in addition, the slaughtering of these sacrifices in the north breaks the root power of anger and the destroyer. So as is explained in Maimonides' account of the temple courtyards and in Ramchal's own account of the temple courtyards in the future temple, adjacent to the vestibule of the north gate of the inner courtyard is the slaughter area. We're talking about an area between the northern gate of this inner courtyard and the altar itself in the center of the courtyard. There's this area called Bet Mitbachayim. The Hebrew word bet literally means a house, or here it's the area in which the slaughters are performed. Remember that the underlying principle explained earlier is that all the various areas of the temple are differentiated in accordance with the specific spiritual lights that shine in each one, providing the power to carry out the specific activity associated with that place. So now specific lights emerge, and it's these lights which are going to bring about the sweetening of the sweetening that comes about through the sacrifices. And it's at this point that we are going to leave Ramchal's account right now, which we shall, God willing, return to in future sessions. The profound depth of all of this is scarcely comprehensible to any of us, only with a tremendous amount of hitbonenut, of contemplation on these concepts, of further study of the temple laws, the very, very intricate system of laws, and a further study of Ramchal's writings, we will begin to understand the profound meaning of all of this. And in the world in which we are living right now, with the waves of protest across the world against what is happening in Israel and in the wars in Gaza, let us really understand that essentially the entire opposition of the world to Israel is primarily, although this is not stated explicitly, is opposition to the idea of the restoring of the temple, for the precise reason that all of those forces that are making war against the people of Israel are terrified that Israel would rise to our role in the creation, which is to bring blessing into the creation, because the forces that we observe today, which are bringing terror, destruction, death, mutilation, horror into the world, these are precisely the forces of darkness that the temple will come to dispel and to rectify. And for that reason, when we focus our thoughts and our mind on the Holy Temple now, we are part of God's war to bring His blessing into the world. This is a war that we perform. We, the non-combatants, do not need to use the weapons of war. Without question, anybody who has put themselves in the role of Amalek, who is killing and attacking, maiming, injuring weak little babies, children, old women, old men, defenseless people, anybody who puts themselves in the role of Amalek must be dealt with correspondingly to be destroyed, as the Torah instructs us. But the real war is the war of the Spirit, of strengthening ourselves in the belief in what all of our prophets have taught us, in what the Talmud has taught us, what the Poskim, what Rambam have taught us about the coming return of the temple. When we strengthen ourselves, and wherever our voice can be heard, the voice of reason, Divrei Hachamim benachat nishma'im, the words of the wise are heard through nachat, through calm, through pleasantness. And it's our prayer and our hope that God will open the hearts and minds of people, that will help people to understand that you cannot continue to think only in your square box. You have to get out of this and look to a better future which may be surprising to the world. And when we will focus our thoughts on this coming temple, Rabbi Nachman has promised us that when many, many people focus on one idea, one concept, they can actually bring it into being. We see the power of the mass media to drive people's minds to wherever they want, so that enough people think something, it can actually cause an inflation. As Rabbi Nachman states, inflation may be caused by many, many people all actually thinking in terms of, well, there's an inflation. Well, all the more so when people will focus their minds on this concept, which is absolutely essential to the future of the world, because the world has run out of ideas for salvation. Nobody now has a feasible suggestion for how we are going to bring millions and millions and millions of people who claim to believe in the supreme power to think outside the box, to understand that the wisdom is here, has been here for thousands of years, and that not the rockets and not all of the attacks will bring peace to the world, but only a genuine embrace of God's law, the law of joy, the law of freedom. And may it be His will that we shall see His holy temple restored quickly in our time.